I was jamming to that intro. I love it. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Reflect, Recalibrate. Woo woo! We are your lovely lady artivist hosts, the lovely Jana E. Dandridge, and myself, Danny Snyder. This is the final part 3 of our Environmental Art Advocacy Collection, when we invite some of our RFC comrades to our discussion. Today we're going to be reflecting with the lovely Dori Miller. Dori is an oil painter, papermaker, installation, and teaching artist. And we also have Olumide Idowu, a climate change activist from Nigeria and the co-founder of the International Climate Change Development Initiative. Round of applause. Snap, 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 snap. And for those audiences who are so devoted to the RFC, who showed up at 1 p.m. ET live today, super apologize. We are having some dumb technical issues today.
It's the gremlins.
It's the
gremlins.
It's
The gremlins.
I was going to blame it on climate change, but we're going to say gremlins. But YouTube gremlins were rude today to us. So thank you all for trying to come on live with us. I apologize that we couldn't go live today. You guys are awesome. Please. Oh, that's something we're trying not to do. We're trying not to say guys so much. You all, queens, kings, whoever you all are awesome for joining us. Thank you. All right. Janet, you want to share some news before we get into our discussion today?
Yes, real quick news bites. Now, usually I'm only giving one, but today calls for a couple of them, okay? So from the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, NPR reports that the National Endowment for the Arts has canceled its decades-long Creative Writing Fellowship, an annual program in place since 1966. Applicants for this year's $50,000 grant were notified of the cancellation last week through an email, which states that the NEA was eliminating existing funding opportunities that fall outside of the federal administration's new priorities. That's the first thing.
You said we're keeping it quick, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the first thing. And then from ABC News, the White House plans to conduct a wide-ranging review of the Smithsonian Institution's museum exhibitions, materials, and operations ahead of America's 250th anniversary next year to ensure the museums align with President Donald Trump's view of American history, a White House official confirmed to ABC News. The White House wants to ensure that the museums reflect the unity, progress, and enduring values that define the American story. Additionally, part of this review is to assess tone, historical framing, and alignment with American ideals. The museums that are in review will be the National Museum of American History, the National Museum of Natural History, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the National Museum of the American Indian, the National Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, and the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. Ooh. So, Danny.
Pretty much every museum in DC. Yeah. What's funny, I'm smiling a lot, but it's not because I'm enjoying this news. I was a little bit amused by both Dori and Olumide both leaning back going, oh, okay. I just couldn't help but notice everyone's reactions on screen. That's a lot. That's a lot. Dori, I bet you have some opinions. You want to share any of your opinions? You don't have to.
You sure you want them? Well, let me start with some good news. Believe it or not, I read recently this week that the back catalog of Sesame Street Netflix has, so that it can be viewed for free for everyone to save Sesame Street. So I saw that.
What?
Yep. And I posted it on my Instagram stories, like, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
This is how you save stuff, you know? So that was the good news. And when you said the Hirshhorn, my heart broke even further. But then I just recently went to the Whitney to see Amy Sherald's portrait that she canceled out of the Smithsonian, and I got to see the Statue of Liberty portrait at the Whitney. So I'm glad I got to see that, because it's a trans person. And so it was banned from, if I hope I'm saying this correctly, from the Whitney, and I mean from the
From the
Smithsonian
National.
Portrait Gallery. That's it. Sorry,
Yes,
Portrait Gallery.
exactly.
And so I was glad to see it. It was just really good.
Thank you, Dori, for sharing that. And Olumide, do you have any comments? I know that you're not in the States with us, but anything you want to share?
Well, I don't really have anything to make or contribute based on I'm not on ground, so I will not be able to actually make comment. But I know that, well, everything that we see that is going on, there must be a reason and there must be a why. But I just felt that we are looking for a better planet. That's just it.
Yes, so it's curious to find out what folks are thinking who are in other countries when it comes to arts, right? And the president canceling, banning, doing everything possible to prevent artists from participating in this particular society so that we can help people understand what the injustices are, what the beauty is. We can bring light to those things that are hurting us. And I think that's something that resonates across countries. The arts helps folks understand, feel, and experience life in another way. So yes, that's the brief news bite from the United States of America.
All right. Well, let's jump into our opening question, but I'm sure there are themes from our news that will interweave with our discussion today. So the opening question that we want today is a question that we actually posted on social media this week, and we got a couple of responses on social media. We were wondering from you both, as well as our fans and our followers, what environmental artwork was a catalyst for you in reducing your carbon footprint? And I'll just say very briefly, in the last episode, I mentioned a production that I worked on called Once There Were Six Seasons by Glass Half Full Theater. And that to me was a big catalyst for me. So for those of you who listened to that last episode, awesome. If you haven't, go back, check it out. Check out our first episode too of this collection for sure. But yes, Dori, Olumide, anyone want to share something that really inspired you?
That was a hard question for me because I'm trying to narrow it down to any one thing. And honestly, it was not an artwork, so to speak. It was more of an action, in that when I was a kid and we were, looking at, in walking around in the woods or walking around near streams and just seeing how people abuse them by polluting them. And then there would be things, groups and actions to come together to clean up a stream for a day or clean up a park for a day. And so I can't say that that was particularly an artwork. So I had trouble making that connection specifically because I'd already been thinking about that before I experienced artwork in that way.
I'm curious, Dori, do you consider any of your paintings and works to be artivism or
Yeah.
just within the advocacy of environmental justice?
I was thinking about the one that I think there's many or a few, but the one in particular is I have a silk screen I did where I studied herbalism for my own health for some years. And I learned, and this is going to blow your mind, I learned that herbalists were trying to get the name of poison ivy changed to potent ivy because poison's so negative. And because this plant has a tendency to grow up around the edges of construction sites. So I was just seeing what Janet said in a previous podcast. Think about that. This is one of the ways that the earth is protecting herself.
Oh, okay.
So I made a screen print, and I did a block of some poison ivy carving onto the paper. But what I wrote was that quote that I just told you along the top, and then in the middle I wrote, "Believe in your mother." Like, I have faith in this planet to protect herself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one work that I did in light of that.
That's cool. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we're already learning things. Yeah, Olumide, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm gonna respond to this based on an environmentalist and the conversation of the issue of carbon footprints. When you look at environmental arts, like the question you asked, for me, I'm seeing it from an angle of emotional connection with nature. When you see yourself connecting with nature, it gives you a deep sense of emotion that binds with the environment. And it's actually something that actually motivates you to be more sustainable, or helps you to reduce your personal carbon footprints, whether it's out of love or responsibility for the planet. And this action also help you to see where you can start looking at building collective actions in the area of creating a space where everybody can be able to connect, discuss the issue of climate or the issue of sustainability, or where you can see a lot of people, being experiencing, inspiration or collaboration through reducing your carbon, like the issue of tree planting, cycling, and even clean energy action. So it's a conversation of how do you influence lifestyle choices? How do you influence what you want to pull into the nature? How do you manage the nature? How do you promote, sustainable actions across the value chain? So it's very important for us to start looking at how do we actually raise those awareness that help us to be creative and help us to build connection, that we make more aware of how our daily choices contribute to climate change. I think that's the point I will be looking at it from, because reducing our carbon footprint actually help us to understand. It's just like you are going to a gym every day. You see what the gym or your exercise is doing to your body. Reducing the carbon footprint is actually going to, do a sense of, a responsibility, a sense of connection to nature. So I think that's what that looks like for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I want to read a response from one of the folks that commented on our post on social media, because this really ties into what you were talking about. Amy Funderburk, very, very devoted fan. She probably was there at 1 p.m. today. She said, when I was preparing for the piece that she wrote for Art and Object, when I was preparing for the piece that I wrote for Art and Object, I watched the film Burning Ice. The most memorable moment for me came when the architect, engineer, and artist Francesca Galazzi, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, released a canister of compressed carbon dioxide as a statement. Later, one of the scientists revealed that this amount of CO2 represents only 20 miles in a car. I think about this statistic frequently when I'm driving to my studio that is 35 minutes away, and I try to spend as much time there as possible rather than going multiple times for shorter periods due to the driving distance. Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Thank you for commenting on that. And I have not seen Burning Ice, and I'll be honest, Amy has nagged me before to watch that movie, so documentary. So I will eventually be going to see that. But yeah, this artist actually like has this canister and releases it, and you're like, no, why would you do that? And then you find out it's only 20 miles of a car. And then it makes you feel like, oh, that's that seems so insignificant now, right? But this is definitely a theme I think we'll explore today, is this spectrum of significance and insignificance, of like doom and gloom versus optimism, of how can we get that one person to take less trips in their car, for example. Or like Janet, maybe Janet can start biking through the woods to work.
Now, you know, Danny, you already know. I do live in a forest on dirt roads,
With
and
bears.
yeah, with bears, right? So, yeah, biking with the 3-year-old, people do it. That's what people do here. I see it often. Matter of fact, I have a neighbor who has an electric bike. Um, and she has her 3-year-old, 4-year-old now on the back, and she's rolling down the main highway 100. I'm like, this is crazy. However, it is so valuable to understand that we are able to do that, right? If we have that type of transportation, also we can use our feet or whichever way we get around without having to use some type of vehicle. Um, if it's possible, things are challenging when you live in rural areas, right? You're walking or you're driving or you're biking. It's one of those things, and it takes a long time. And so time is part of this equation when thinking about the society that we live in here in the States. You know, if you can't get to doing what you have to do in a certain amount of time, then you're left behind. And that's unfortunate. It relates to how we look at lifestyle and what it means to live holistically. So you're taking into account your health, you're taking into account the health of the earth, you're taking into account having to maintain for your family financially, right? And then going back to health, your mental health. So many different factors account for how we interact with our environments. I would like to share, and I said I was going to do that, but one of the works that I recall thinking about environmental art, and we're going to talk about this definition, is by an artist named Fujiko Nakaya. And that work is about fog. And I saw this work when I was in an artist residency in Paris. I went to London by a train, right? And I walked through the work, and something so simplistic as walking through fog and thinking about the material that is used, right? Which is the environment, the mechanism to create fog that is not naturally occurring. And when I looked up the work, there was nothing in my immediate cursory review that considered that environmental art. What it was an examination of science and art and thinking about how our bodies move through the environment. I thought it was interesting that it wasn't referred to as environmental art, though. In anything that I've seen, I didn't see it referred to as environmental art. And I'm really curious when it comes to folks who aren't artists, like you, Olumide, right? And what you do as an activist, as a climate activist, if you notice or have you communicated with artists in how artists can assist you in the work that you do in these different places when you're going around providing this, as you said, awareness, right? And collective actions. Have you considered working with artists, or have you worked with artists? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so interestingly, let me just quickly say that I categorize artists with sometimes I call them journalists, or I call them writers, I call them people that help you to propagate, when you're in church setting, propagating gospel, or they help you to propagate the conversation of environment, conversation of climate. And when you see, for me personally, there's this project I have in my country twice in a year. It's called Media for Climate Justice. And in the context of Media for Climate Justice, we are looking at people that use art, people that use music, people that use writing, people that use pictures, and sort of ways of disseminating information. And to be frank with you, it has shown us that this set of people are people that actually interpret I don't want to call it jargons, the big grammars we use in the climate or the environment space, using different kind of images, uh, uh, different kind of conversation, or different kind of writings, because we call it pictorial representation of how you can be able to understand what you're actually doing. Their action efforts to raise awareness, painting, music, poetry, theater, even films, which is something that is very, very, visible and relatable to people, most especially people that that cannot speak English. When you use a pictorial representation, it gives them that sense of knowledge, and the image comes to them. How do they? This kind of people also help us to mobilize community, in the sense that their actions and their programs, let me say their works, brings people together, you know, most especially when these people are doing exhibitions, when they are performing, or they're having, public conversation, or it's all about creating a space for dialogue, and helps us to have the sense of promoting a sustainable practices. And for instance, somebody doing a campaign and using what they call it, using a music to talk about how our environment is being polluted, or being singing about how we should end plastic pollution. You know, for a lot of people that are fan of that kind of musician, they are not only listening to the music, they are listening to the music to understand the lyrics. With that, is you know, passing a message, a strong message. And more than you, that you are technical, going to the community and start speaking global warming, talking about, big grammar. This set of people, these are the people that our fathers and ancestors, our great grandfather in the village, we put on their transistor radio and be listening to people talking about stories, or using, tell stories to tell stuff, or somebody reading a journal to tell people that, oh, I'm reading so book today, and this book is all about this. That actually relates, gives more conversation for people. Is it in the area of advocating for policy? Is it an area of mobilizing community? Is it the area of amplifying voices of the vulnerable communities? I think we should give credit to people that are into art, and people that are actually helping us to bring the understanding of, you know, the picture to people, to be able to understand, rather than for them to be, going through some personal issues and stuff. So I think these are things that we are training our young lawyers for climate justice for a couple of. We started 3 years ago, and as of now, I can say that we have cohorts of like 6 cohorts, and it has really gone far by giving them platform to also, express their most especially. I have a very good photographer that he only does photography for weddings program. But do you know, because I brought him into this program, he has started looking at nature, started taking nature pictures, telling stories, getting funding, traveling to tell about, doing exhibitions. And he was able to tell people the story of a single picture that is going viral, and how that picture is telling the story, how that a company in that community is affecting the people's health, the atmosphere. We talk about the air pollution. So for me, I think that is they are really helping a lot, and I give them kudos. And as long as we are still running this kind of organization, we are open to everybody using art propagate the gospel of the environment. Thank you so much.
You have done this before, Olumide. You've done this before. I was like, can you come to every grant application and presentation and pitch deck I gotta do? That's good. No, you said all the things that you said it all really well. Yeah, all the things we need to say, and you said it very well. I think like this is gonna be a theme also today, is how much art, environmental art is used towards educating, to sharing stories and to educating, which sharing stories is part of education, right? How much that is the goal, and versus maybe a different kind of call to action. So an environmental piece that is sharing research versus an environmental piece that's specifically saying do this thing, such as like instead of taking your trash out once a week, take your trash out once a month. See what that's like, or once a year. What could that look like if you took your trash out only once a year? Your eyes got really big, Olumide. Is that impossible for you?
Well, you want to take your trash out once a year. It's a disaster.
Well, I was thinking when I say that, I was actually thinking about this one documentary, and I feel bad I can't remember the name, but this couple, they made this challenge, and this husband and wife, they had this challenge where they each got one just little trash can, like a little trash can, not even a big kitchen trash can, little trash can, and they could only it was like a competition basically to see who would have more trash at the end of the year, but they could not produce more. They could not produce, like, they could not go beyond that container. That's all they had for how much trash they could produce in a year.
Oh, I mean, were they doing compost?
They
composting it?
It was amazing. Like, first of all, yes, they were composting everything. They were trying to upcycle any kind of plastic that came in the house. They had to figure out a way to upcycle it. They couldn't just put it in the trash. And they certain things they were able to recycle. I think glass they recycled, for example. But they when they would go to the grocery store, they would try not to buy anything in plastic. Nothing could come home in plastic. And that's really hard if you want to eat meat, for example. That's really, really difficult, right? So, and they were gardening a lot. But it was funny at one point, like their washer broke or something, and they had to buy a new washer. The husband decided to buy, I can't remember what it was, some sort of appliance, and it came with all the styrofoam and crap. And he was like, I don't know what to do with this because it's too much. And so he was panicking. And that was part of the reason he lost the competition and she won that year. But
Well,
I was like, 1 year, they could only fill up this one trash can. And I was like, that's amazing. And I want yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm curious. Let me ask. When they go out,
Mhm.
every trash they generate, they throw it out. They don't bring it in, right?
No, this is all, well, that's a good question. I don't know if they were just focusing on what they were doing at home. So that's a question. They could go
Uh-uh.
out to eat, I guess. Maybe they didn't show that in the
Exactly.
documentary.
Exactly. So,
Cheaters.
so just imagine you using a washroom and using a tissue paper every time, especially for women. Is it possible that, it depends on the criteria and what you can trash, what you cannot trash, and do you go out to eat and bring it, or you go out, like, for instance, when you practice sustainable waste management. Most times when you eat outside or you buy something and you finish eating it in your car, you are not supposed to throw it outside, right? You're supposed to keep it in your car. Then when you get home, you trash it responsibly. How does that look like? Do they do that? Are they doing that, or they leave all the trash they do in their cars for the 1 year? I think that competition, there's a lot of maybe when we go through it, we'll be able to understand the criteria. We're able to understand what they can do and what they cannot do. Because alone in the house alone, for a year, when you sweep, well, maybe because of different in countries, in Nigeria, when you sweep, there's no how you will not generate not only even paper, all those recyclable stuffs, but something that cannot be recyclable. You will definitely get what comes when rain falls and it brings refuse to your house in front of your building. Who sweep it for you? Who trash them for you? You have to sweep your house yourself. So who is doing that? I think that competition need to look into. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, no, that these are all points that I'm thinking about. Like, I want to watch this movie because I'm considering the different locations that we're in, right? And one of the things they did was, oh, we're not going to purchase anything that is wrapped in plastic because apparently, where they are. Where I am in Vermont, you can go to the farm stand. It's not wrapped in plastic, right? Or people who actually have the farms and livestock, they're doing the slaughtering and then they're putting it into, I don't know, freezers and things like that. So it's not using those type of packaging materials, and you do have those packaging materials within the grocery store. And also to something you said, Olumide, in Vermont, what is very different from my hometown, DC, I noticed that there aren't any trash cans anywhere. First of all, because the bears would get into it. Secondly, because what Vermonters do is like pack in, pack out. So if you are taking it, if you bring it, you need to take it. And then you go back home and you compost it or you recycle it or you upcycle it. So it's fully your responsibility. And I think it's wonderful. Yet the city person in me is like, I need a trash can. I'm out and about right now. But I've learned that, okay, I get it. I'm learning more how this is helpful in terms of my carbon footprint. I really want to know, Dori, what do you think about this idea of having this little thing of trash, especially, within your art practice and the materials that are being used?
Grateful for the question. Thank you so much. The first thing I thought of is when you started talking about this is I had the privilege of working on a small farm for about 10 years that had a 2-year natural compost pile. So our job was anybody, in the person who owned the land we all would get these plaster buckets. And I lived in a place where I could do this. You have to have a separate room. As Olumide was just saying, you cannot live with this. It's disgusting. And so I had a separate room where especially through the summer, where I could keep these plaster buckets. And what was amazing to me when I heard you talking about this, I almost had no garbage because I recycle everything. I don't buy plastic as much as possible. I buy things in bulk with my own containers, and I eat a lot of, fruits and vegetables and such. And coffee, eggshells, all of it. And the only thing we could not put in the 2-year natural compost pile, because it is fierce, and what comes out after 2 years is black gold soil, is beef bones, and I don't eat beef very often. And I think that was it pretty much. You could put petroleum in this thing and it would break it down to beautiful soil in 2 years. It was amazing. And I remember the only thing it would never break down that you'd see when we were tilling the beds would avocado skins and mussel shells. You just see them pop up around the ground. It was amazing after 2 years. So anyway, that's that thing. And I was just amazed that I really was not putting any garbage out for a week at a time, because I was able to recycle it. I wasn't limited to one can. Then I would definitely have failed Danny's movie test for sure. But I recycle everything. And then as far as materials goes, I'm so glad you asked me about that. I have completely detoxified my studio as new products have come out. My favorite are the instead of turpentines to mediums for your paint. There's a company called Classico that makes instead using lavender oil, and their tagline is non-toxic since the Renaissance. So that's one thing. And then I don't know if you've heard, the cadmiums, they've come up with an alternative. They're no longer cadmiums, so they're synthetically made. And then flake white paint, no more lead. You can get a flake white replacement. And my favorite of all time is there is a company that found 3 sites of toxic waste, scraped it all up out of the riverbeds, or so to speak, and turned it into oil paint. So you've got these 3 colors that they've repurposed the waste into paint.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's out there. Oh, and the other thing I learned was, Torrit gray, if you're a painter, apparently every year the color of Torrit, Torrit, I think it is, gray, it'll be slightly different because it's the waste from the factory in the painting company, and they use that to make Torrit gray. So every couple of years it'll be a different shade, but it's based on the waste.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
cool.
I had
And
no idea that was a thing. That's amazing.
yeah, I love it. I love it.
And Sadi had actually mentioned a couple of those things too in the last episode.
Yeah.
I will just say the trash thing was just one example of a potential call to action, but we'll come back to that. I want to let Janet actually ask the actual, this is like the main question of the day. Go ahead, Janet.
Yeah, no, that was a good thought to put out there. You see what it generated. So thank you, Danny. Let's get into what we have studied. Studied loosely, I'll say. So we're wondering from our last two episodes of the Environmental Art and Advocacy Collection, right? From the last two episodes, tell us something that surprised you, something that made you say, aha, or raised your curiosity.
I can go if it's all right. I'm going back to the first one. When you were talking about, because I was kind of almost yelling at the screen because I knew an answer a little bit. I think I knew an answer based on my research. You were talking about Texas and the electrical grid. And I remember when you guys were all going through, when you were all going through that, isn't the electrical grid privatized in Texas? And that's what the trouble is?
You're right. Thank
Okay.
you. You're
All right.
absolutely right. Because I said something, I think like, oh, it's
Yeah.
probably because they don't pay taxes there,
No,
state taxes.
no.
But you're absolutely right. That was the big issue. Thank
Right.
you for correcting that. Thank you.
But there's more for this, is that I grew up, I didn't know it was a privilege until I started thinking about this. I grew up in New Jersey, and we have the privilege of something called the Public Utilities Commission. And what that means is if there are any shenanigans coming from the electrical company, the gas company, or the water company, and they're like trying to overcharge you, or they're not giving you your service, or not fixing things, the card you can play in your back pocket is you call up that company and you drop those words. You just say Public Utilities Commission, and all of a sudden there's action, because they will be fined into the ground and they will be stopped. So Texas does not have that, I am sure. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in Texas wouldn't be in the situation it's in.
Well, that's definitely an aha moment.
But from what Dori said, I think my watchword is about taking responsibility. It's very important in everything, any actions, and also trying to make sure that anything for us without us is not meant for us. Yeah, when I say anything for us without us, it is not meant for us. So it's very simple. When you are making an agenda for people and you are not getting their opinion, then that agenda might not work for them. It's just like when they say anything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. When you go to Vegas, you behave like people from Vegas. When you go to Rome, you behave like people like in Romance. So in this context of this conversation, I think if we want to really empower or engage people in every conversation or anything that we do, then we need to, or let me say, when you want to build you want to tell people something or you want to do something for people, you need to let the people actually understand what you are doing for them. So by the time you are handing it over to them, they'll be able to use it, responsibly. Because most time, what happens to us is that we make decisions for people while people don't actually have the opportunity to, voice out their opinion. And it's very important when you see the environment space. You are building bridges, but we don't need bridge. What we actually need is something else entirely. Or you are building walls. We don't need walls. What we need entirely is different. Or you're trying to say, okay, uh, 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 there's a school here before. Let us put a church here, or let us put a mosque here. And you're not thinking about the people and the community, or you're not thinking about people in the area, then you are not taking their decision into cognizance, and you are not making them to understand the impact of how you are taking responsibility away from them rather than making them to be part of the result. It's the word they say, anything for us without us, it is not meant for us, and it will never work out until you give them that flaw, that opinion. And that is why every conversation we have here must be about, what do you think? Do you want to do this? How do you want to make it work? How do you feel? What do you think about the environment? Because this environment we find ourselves, we are the polluters. Is what we put into the environment we take back. So it is high time for us to take that responsibility. Thank you so much.
So Olumide, I'm going to continue on this train of thought because you're in Nigeria. And I know some other Nigerians. And one of the things that I've heard from all my Nigerian homies is about the blackouts. And so we talk about privatization of utilities, right? And then the Public Utilities Commission. How does that function in Nigeria, and make that connection to do what your work is as a climate activist?
So I don't want to, I just want to go straight to the point, because when it comes to the issue of blackouts, you notice when the call was going on, there was a blackout, right? There's a kind of blackout that happens once in a while. So, but in the context of Nigeria, we've been facing this for long time. Actually, since I was born, the blackout has been there, but there's a little changes that come with higher tariff, if you understand what I mean, with higher costs. And like what I mentioned the last time is that when you want to make a decision, when you want to, how will I put it? When you want to set up an agenda for people and you don't carry them along, when you bring the agenda to them, it looks strange. And that is why you see the economy keeps growing. Economy keeps, you know, turning down, because there's a lot of lack of responsibility, lack of trust, and lack of collaboration in the process. The blackout is just greediness. And when you are sleeping and enjoying yourself in your cozy room with nice electricity, and people are there in the community, there's an adage that says when two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that suffers. So it boils down to leadership, it boils down to commitment, and it boils down to trust. Because when I say trust, we put trust in our leader to give us basic amenities. We put trust in our leaders to make sure that all infrastructures are being put in place. We put trust in our leaders to put us in the right phase. And it's just like you are running a business that you need electricity every day. What is going to happen to your income? Then you start going for alternative. Even the alternative that we are shouting, solar panel and everything, moving from fossil fuel to renewable energy, how many people can afford it? That is another problem that we are facing. So I think there's a need, we call it just transition. We need just, and that's why we call it climate justice. And this just need to happen now. And the way it's going to happen is when people speak out, when people challenge the status quo, when people, ask for accountability, transparency, and when people look at the monitoring and evaluation of all these processes, all these programs and projects. That is the only way we can be able to achieve, let me put it, out of 24 hours, 20 hours electricity. But I was so shocked when my new president came in. We see a little bit of changes in electricity. And in my area, just I'm not praising the Nigerian government, but I'm giving them that a little bit of praise in a way whereby from before and now there's a little bit of growth. And I think if something like that can happen, then there's possibility that it can be 24 hours. It just needs to be what? Sincerity, and make sure that everybody take responsibility. Let me give you an instance, and I will mention this country on this call. There was a time I went to Benin Republic, just a very close country, border to Nigeria. And the way they use electricity in that country baffles me so much. 24 hours, no breakdown electricity. And there's a story they told us when we were growing up. They say it's Nigeria that gave Benin Republic electricity. But me, I'm giving you light, but I don't have light. Then I begin to understand that utility, the way we use electricity, also matters a lot. And I'm sure in America, bills are very high when it comes to electricity, water bills, and everything. Every month you have to make payments and stuff like that. But we call it estimated bill, that they will just give you any amounts to pay.
You said
Suddenly, we now move to
it's called estimated.
bill, estimated. They
Oh,
just
okay.
give you an estimate based on the look at, you have 3 bedroom, you have a self-contained. They just give you the estimate. But now we now have meter that you can read how much, and some people use meter reader to calculate how much they are spending. That's why I said there's a level of growth in that area of sector. The light is off as long as they can see. You don't put on fridge every time. There's a time you on your fridge because it's frozen. You have to off it for some time. But that culture has not been a culture to some people. And that is the narrative we need to start changing. That mentality for our people in the vulnerable community on how to maximize the electricity they use so that they'll be able to understand that what they are burning is too much. And it will reduce the problem we are facing. So for me, I think it's about, I said, trust, it's about commitment. And these are the people we voted for, we vouch for, and we want them to be our leaders and our servants to take us to the right path. So it's a little bit
So
of
you
opportunity
illuminate
that
you because you went out for a second, and I just want to make sure you were speaking to conservation, right? You said Benin. Is that where did you say what was the country again?
Benin Republic, Republic of Benin.
Okay, yes, exactly. Yes. And so conservation is a major aspect, I believe, because you did go out for a second, but you were saying how they utilize utilities, not actually overusing or just, let's say, keeping the lights on when they're not using the light, turning things off. I think this is something that is so simplistic, and like you said, it has to be built into the mentality right now. For example, with my kid, in our household, if we are not using the lights, yes, we turn them off. When we're brushing our teeth, if we are not getting the water into our mouth, we turn it off. You know what I'm saying? If we don't need the heat, we turn it off. We're not, we're looking to not overuse. And I think that's such an important element to understand and to ingrain into the brains of everyone. And you said something also, the reason why it's called climate justice, just transition. And so, for example, with the Nigerian government and creating these meters so that people just aren't going to be charged whatever they think it is, even though there are problems with, meters and whatnot, but just trying to bring it back to something that's just. And I want to move on from this because our time is definitely running short. And I want to, the question is open to everyone. Well, I guess Dori, I'm thinking about really as far as art. Because Olumide brought up the just transition, and you talked about how you went to using lavender oils, right? I'm wondering how and when that, and it relates to something we said earlier, when that shift occurred for you where you thought, oh, I need to utilize materials that are less toxic, because you said you've created a studio that is just, environmentally friendly. Keep that in mind. I'm thinking about when Saudi was talking about how she upcycles the plastics, and how she shared with us that she understands that she has a carbon footprint just by merely existing, right? Us as humans, merely existing, we are having a tremendous impact on the planet. But knowing that, knowing that we have to still communicate. And as we've talked about in here, bring up the awareness. She is upcycling, right? And I don't know if she actually said when she transitioned to, using plastics in her practice, because she was a dancer previously. I'm not sure when she transitioned, but I'm curious, Dori, what was that moment for you, where you were like, oh, I have to switch up?
Thank you for that question. It's not going to be a satisfying answer as you would like, in that I can't give you a definitive line, but I can tell you this, that as I've gotten older and as I've lived longer with more experience of being a person who's alive, it's been a cumulative effect. I want to use less. I want to take up less space, because I think about the exponentiality of that. I'm just one person. And if I do this and everybody does this, then together we will make a difference. Like, all I can really do is, like, let me start cleaning up my own house before, and it's been one thing after another. It could have been maybe the first time I couldn't breathe right, or I got a little rash from a material I used, and it started out maybe selfish, right? And then I realized, and I watched somebody else who was ill from some materials they used, or something like that. And I'm thinking, why does everything have to be, I mean, isn't it I don't know, this is weird. Is it, we can detect simply with our bodies if something is poisonous. And then if we can do that, can't we act on that? Well, wait, if this is not good for me, this is not good for anybody or the earth. Why am I using this? And I just question every single thing I run into in this case. I mean, I've had doctors get so upset with me because I refuse to use pharmaceuticals unless it's an absolute emergency. I know people who want, antibiotics every time they get a cold, or, I'm going into a different rabbit hole here. But the idea that if you just do some research and do the work and pay attention, you can figure this out. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it totally does. And I don't think, medicine, like, that's something Sadi brought up too, of like, she was thinking about, if something happens with my health, that increases my carbon footprint if I have to go to a doctor. She mentioned that exact example. Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to think too in my life when the shifts were, and I feel like it was kind of gradual. Again, just as with every year, I'm learning more and more. And honestly, feeling more and more guilty every year. The guilt is real. And I'm not gonna lie, my boyfriend's gonna be mad that I'm mentioning this, but I have a boyfriend who freaking loves plastic, and it drives me up the wall. And loves to travel, and I also love traveling. That's the hardest one for me, but I'm like, yeah, it's there's been lots of discussions in this household about how we can reduce. I feel like I'm doing a lot more than him. And this is where it comes back to that thought at the beginning of like, okay, well, if I can just, I think about this as a teacher a lot. If I can just get just one student to shift their attitude and shift their actions, to shift their behavior, even if it's just a small little behavioral change, then I feel like, okay, I was effective. I did my part. I did my job, And so I think about that with my boyfriend. Like, we could just a little bit, like, we recycle now. The man would have never recycled before he met me. So at least, at least we got that. I, of course, am the one that takes the recycling to the recycling center, but that too, that was something else we brought up in the last episode of, like, Sadi mentioned, like, how much of our recycling gets shipped off to these other countries and creates other issues in other countries, so I do get overwhelmed when I'm thinking about this spectrum of optimism versus just, accepting the fact that no matter what, I'm gonna have a carbon footprint. It's, oh, I see Janet doing this. We've been both talking a lot about being overwhelmed lately, for sure. I think Janet more so than me, but yeah, it's hard. And right now, I'll just conclude with something I'm thinking a lot about is, okay, if I were to do a project next year, which I really want to do something again for Earth Day next year. I did a great project last year. If I do something this year, how can I make it, how can I use material? Like, how can I not buy anything? How can I do everything upcycling? Let's start with that, you know, really reduce my carbon footprint as much as possible in this project. But also, I feel like all of my climate change projects up to this point have all been about sharing research, and giving different ideas like, you know, oh, if you're into gardening, maybe what can you do about increasing local biodiversity and growing more pollinator plants, for example? Or if you're really interested in arts and crafts, how can you stop going to Michael's and upcycle stuff, you know? But this year, I want to have a more specific call to action. And I'm also thinking, like what Olumide was saying, is like we all need to speak up. We all really, really need to speak up, because I think about when I was living in Germany, the mindsets around recycling and conservation were completely different than my experience here in the States. So I'm like, there needs to be more happening at top to shift culture, to shift mindsets around those two things in particular. But what can I do in an action, in a project that's very specific to like do this one trash can a month maybe, or something like that, or this is what you can do to help change policy, to help change our officials, our representing officials' minds, so that they can shift mindsets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Could I share one thing really quick? Because I just thought of it. It's just something really good news on the horizon about different kinds of energy. Last year, I was on an Amtrak train and I happened to be sitting next to someone who was working on their laptop and on the phone, and they had this 3D schematic going on that they were just whiz banging through. And I was trying, you know, I wanted to look. I was so curious and I was just looking. And then when the call was over, he turns to me and he says, "I'm sorry, I hope my phone call didn't bother you." I'm like, "Oh, not at all. I hope you don't mind. I'm very curious as to what's going on in your computer." Turns out, he was on his way to a place in upstate New York. They figured out a way, the company he worked for, and he was going for the maiden launch of how to fuel tugboats on waterways with ammonia. And I said, "Well, what's the carbon footprint about that? Is there any waste?" He goes, "There's no waste, because they figured out a way to make it," this is what he said, "attach the molecules attaches to oxygen, and then the ammonia dissipates without any artifacts, and poof, and there's no waste." So they're trying to clean up the waterways, and the name of the company is called Amogy, AMOGY, and you can read about their science, but it's like this very specific, I said, "Could you think you're going to get that into cars?" He goes, "We're really interested right now in just boats on waterways." So think about all the shipping that happens on the water and over the ocean. That's what it's going for. So that kind of specificity just blows me away, because there's so many other companies taking up the mantle for something specific over here. And again, it gives me hope. It just makes me feel so much better.
I do hope to see more of that, especially from our younger generations, our young STEM people. Please save our planet.
I do have some questions about that, Danny.
Uh-huh.
I'm curious about the statistics, and since we have Mr. Climate on here with us, I'm curious about, or hoping, Olumide, can you share, let's just say maybe 3 important statistics related to climate justice that we should know and our audience, right, should know? Because we've just talked about how looking to change how we use fossil fuels, right, or just not use them at all. We talked about how the United States ships so much of its landfill trash into other countries, as well as how people here are suffering, thinking about the body from living atop landfills, and how artists are utilizing materials that are less toxic. Can you give us 3 statistics that we can just take away from this episode and we can look further into? Just briefly, if you could give that to us.
Wow.
I
That's
know.
let me, yeah.
I'm saying you
Let me
Mr.
just,
Climate. I'm saying you Mr. Climate. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. I will just give it based on the global statistics that we see that is actually happening presently. When you look at the people that live in climate vulnerable areas, there's this report from the IPPC reports that actually give us up to 3.6 billion people across the world. They are highly exposed to climate hazards, such as when you see the issue of droughts in the northern parts, you see the issue of heat waves that is going around, even the issue of flooding that is causing a lot of displacements to people. And that is one of the biggest shock that is happening to us when it comes to the climate issue. And this is limiting our capacity to adapt. And that is very, very, important for us to talk about. Because if the IPPC report is telling us that 3.6 billion people are affected, by the vulnerable areas, then it's how many people we have in the world? Close to 7 billion people or so. So that means we have a long way to go in solving the climate crisis that we are facing. And the issue of financing to local communities, almost 70% of global climate finances did not get to the local communities. And it's close to less than 10% of this international climate finance that actually reach the grassroots and the local actors directly. And that is where you see that the uh, the the green climate funds, the global environmental facilities, all these financial mechanisms actually made us to understand that the vulnerable people and other lead frontline actors need more funding to support their local actions and how it must to drive. Then you look at the poor communities, when you go to some areas, let me use Africans for example. When you go to some areas that are rich people, you see less one than 1% emits of air pollution. But when you go to our vulnerable communities, you see close to 50% air quality problem is totally climate injustice and is not acceptable. So that's why we call on wealthy nations and individuals to actually contribute, to the most issue of the greenhouse gas emission, while poorer community bear the great impact. And these poor community are facing this impact because they are not contributing to this emission. So we need to think about the vulnerability, the vulnerable people. We need to talk about our carbon inequality. We need to look at how climate change is linked to finance, how finance is linked to fairness, how fairness is linked to action. And that is the only way we can see all these numbers, reflecting to be able to help us to build solutions. Because if you don't have data, if you don't have information, if you don't have numbers that can influence the kind of change you want to make in the community or in a certain community or places, then you are just wasting time. So I can tell you that categorically that 70% of people have been displaced because of our action and even some of our inaction indirectly. And it is high time for us to call for. There's this slang they say, what do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it? Now, now. So we want climate justice now. We need it now. And we want actions to be taken. We don't want lip service. We don't want to be calling to the table again. We want to be part of the table. We want to be part of the implementation so that the numbers of people at the vulnerable communities can be able to add voices to their people, and everybody will live a fair share of this environment that we find ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you,
Woo child,
Olumide.
woo child, woo
Yeah.
child, woo child.
Yes, you're so good at this. This is great. I'm feeling inspired, which is good because the doom and gloom is real. There's a lot more we can obviously say in all of these different topics and themes and soapboxes, but it is time for us to do our closing question, y'all, which I feel like Luminate's already kind of, and in some ways, maybe indirectly answered this question. But Janet, are you ready? Our question for you all. Oh, sorry. What were we going to say?
I'm going to allow the question to exist because I didn't bring up the image. Is that okay? Oh, there you go.
No, I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to bring
there
it up.
You go. There you go. There you go.
I've changed my background image to our magical unicorn because we like to end our podcast episodes with our magical question, which would be, in your utopia, there would be ... So think about, maybe Dori, let's start with you. In your utopia, there would be...
I know exactly what it is because I've seen it in a fictional television show. And I actually did an artwork about it way back when I was in school. That people would have the superpower in their hands to walk out into a polluted waterway and just move their hands around and it would be clean.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's magical.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
is actually magical.
That would be awesome.
And it's a scene in this cheesy show, and I was so inspired by it. I brought it in and I made like magic gloves and I made paintings around it and put gems all over the gloves and just try to imagine you could just have the superpower.
I'm getting ideas with my students. Okay. Okay. Oh, ooh, all these sparkly, delicious ideas. Okay, Olumide, in your utopia, there would be...
Well, in my utopia, let me first of all let you know that my utopia is not just a dream, it is a future, and it's a future that must be built together. And I'm seeing harmony with nature, I'm seeing peaceful coexistence, and I'm seeing justice and equity. Thank you.
I love that. I love that you closed your eyes to it. You really manifested it. You said, I see it. I see it. It's there. Good. That's why we do this.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Thank you all for those questions. Janet, is there anything you want to add to your utopia today? We always add something every episode.
You know what? I'm just going to let it sit into those two spaces that Dori and Olumide gave us, because with the magical hands and the harmony, peace, and justice. Yes. Well, okay. So we have come to the end of our conversation with Olumide and Dori in this study group episode for the collection, Environmental Art and Advocacy. So first, we want to thank our guests. Thank you, Dori. Thank you, Olumide. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All of your insights, all of the inspirational thoughts that you share with us. And we hope that we gave you the space to share all of what you needed to share today, because it was something related to what you said, Olumide. What we needed to happen today, what needed to be said today was said, right? And so now we go from here. So thank you all. Thank you all. If you haven't watched our last two episodes in the Environmental Art and Advocacy Collection, please do so. Make sure you go back and do that, especially our interview with Sari Nordman. While you're there, make sure you've pressed that subscribe button and like and share and stay tuned for our next collection later this fall. We'd like to remind our listeners that this podcast is funded by the two of us and your donations. Please help keep this podcast going by making a donation through our PayPal link in the show notes below. And with that, we bid you. And I think that's wrong. Actually, remember we talked about this before, where that bid you adieu is not the correct language.
I never actually even say that. I just say
it's
peace.
Yeah,
Ciao.
like I'm just not even going to say it. So
adios, amigos.
Right? So that's what we'll do. We'll say peace, environmental justice.
Peace.